Hey, welcome to Aspects to Vesta. This is the last Vesta video that we'll do. The next thing that we'll move on to is Juno in a couple of weeks at the end of February. We can still keep talking about what you've learned here, though, over Dropbox or over email. So make sure you're not sitting with anything that's frustrating or difficult to understand without asking me about it. So what are aspects? Well, aspects are different relationships that two planets or a planet and asteroid or a planet and a point can have with each other. They're different ways that our chart connects. And there's 5 that we're going to be considering. There's more than that in traditional astrology and definitely more than that in modern astrology, but we're just going to stick with the basics, and we're really going to stick with the first couple. So there's the conjunction, which is when two planets are together. There's the opposition when two planets are sitting 180 degrees away from each other. There's a square when planets are sitting 90 degrees away from each other. A trine, which is 120 degrees away from each other. And then a sextile, which is 60 degrees away from each other. And if two planets or objects or points do not make any of these aspects to each other, then we say in traditional astrology that they can't, quote unquote, see each other, and that they do not relate by aspect. Now, there are aspects that fall into this category, but we're not going to touch them today. We're just going to stick with the basics. So aspects tell us the nature of relationships between two or more things in our chart. Every aspect has its own style, its own signature, its own conflict, its own strength. Some aspects are helpful and some really are a pain in the ass, but even pains in the asses get us to do things. So it's all relative and workable. Since aspects between planets is a topic that you can study for a lifetime, it's important to note that looking at aspects can become really confusing really quickly. If you have multiple aspects to your Vesta, try at first to understand one aspect at a time. Please don't flood yourself with things. Just go one thing by one thing. Start with what makes sense, the most sense to you, before moving on to aspects that seem more nuanced or further from your understanding. We will not get to cover every single scenario, but there are some important rules that can guide you through the learning process. So this is the opposition, right? So one planet is in one house and the other planet is in the exact opposite house. And the nature of this opposition is Saturnian in nature. It's called Saturn's aspect. It is a tug-of-war, a teeter-totter, a balancing act, but something that is right in front of us and impossible to get out of. So it's something we must deal with. There is the square, and the squares are related to Mars. The squares are, like you can see, it's sharp, it's pointy, it's edgy. It's very Mars-like in nature. We'll get into that in a second. The trine is Jupiter's aspect. It's harmonious, gracious. It gives us gifts and opulence. It's flowing. It's very, trines are very kind of sturdy in nature, so they give us some sort of like ease in life. And then the sextile, which is Venus's aspect, which is exciting or definitely about being helpful, even if mildly so. So this is just what they look like. So when you're looking at your chart, if you're looking for an opposition, you're just looking for a planet that's in the opposite house from your Vesta. If you're looking for a square, you're looking for a planet that's sitting 2 houses away from your Vesta. So say this is your Vesta. You'd look for a planet here, a planet here. Well, that would be an opposition. A planet here or a planet here. Or if your Vesta's here, then it would be a planet here or a planet here. So there would just be 2 of these pieces of pie in between your Vesta and the other planet. And then Jupiter, same thing, just 3 not empty, but 3 houses between your Vesta and another planet. And then the sextile is just 1, but yeah, it's just 1 between each. So sextiles happen between earth signs and water signs, or air signs and fire signs. Trines happen between the same element. So usually it's this all fire, all air, all earth, all water. Excuse me. Squares happen between the same between the same modality. So all fixed signs square each other, all mutable signs square each other, all cardinal signs square each other. Oppositions happen to the opposing signs. So Aries opposes Libra, Taurus opposes Scorpio, Gemini opposes Sag, Cancer opposes Capricorn, Leo opposes Aquarius, and Virgo opposes Pisces. And those are oppositions. So again, if you're already lost, don't worry about it. Just kind of like let this roll. Just roll with it for a second. Okay, let's go to conjunctions. So conjunctions are, in traditional astrology, they're when two planets are in the same sign, even if they're 29 degrees apart. In modern Western astrology, we usually consider conjunctions to occur between two planets that are within 10 degrees of each other. Conjunctions are the merging, unification, and union of two different planets or points or energies. Some combinations are easier than others. For our purposes, we're going to focus on Vesta and planets that are in the same sign as Vesta for conjunctions. The closer two planets are together, so the closer something is to your Vesta, the more intense the impact will be. If two things are within 3 degrees in your chart, it's considered an intense or powerful aspect. So take a look at your chart. Is there another planet in the same sign and that therefore house as your Vesta? And just having another planet in the same house or sign as your Vesta colors the way Vesta manifests in your life. Then Vesta is acting under the influence of other things or in conjunction with other planets and their agenda. Any planet that sits in so this is an opposition. So we're talking about, for an example, this would be between the first house and the 7th house, or the second house and the 8th house, or the 3rd house and the 9th house, the house sitting opposite from where your Vesta is. So any planet that sits in opposite sign from your Vesta is in opposition to it. Oppositions are most intense when they are within 3 degrees of an exact 180-degree opposition. Oppositions are oppositional and relationship orientated and adversarial in nature. Some oppositions will be more intense than others. Now remember, this is Saturn's aspect in traditional astrology. The opposition making it Saturnian in nature. So there's that. Saturn is a planet. So when I say Saturn in nature or Saturnian, what I mean is Saturn is stoic and is a hard line and is something that we can't pretend isn't there. It's a reality check. It's a bummer. It's the authority. It's our wisdom. It's our ability to grow up. It's like our chance to grow up and like meet a limit and a boundary and a structure and see what we can do with it. So the opposition feels kind of like that. So Saturn and Mars are probably, I would say, the most difficult planets in traditional astrology to have an opposition from. But oppositions from Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto aren't always so easy. So again, I'll go over all this. Squares. Remember, squares, that 90-degree angle. It looks like an actual square. So any planet that's 90 degrees to the left or to the right of your Vesta is square to your Vesta. And they'll also be in the signs of the same modality, if that makes sense. Now, in traditional astrology, each planet has an aspect that they rule. So Mars rules the square. If you think of a square, it's made up of hard angles, edges, and sharp points. A 90-degree angle is a place of friction, two lines of energy meeting, and neither can pass. A square from Mars or Saturn can manifest as particularly cruel or difficult or painful, as a painful setup or circumstance. Not forever and ever necessarily, but it is something that will jump out when looking at a chart, right? If I'm looking at a chart and there's a square from Saturn or Mars, that's going to draw my attention immediately. It's a place of concern and a place to work on and work with. Squares are also very energetic. So beyond the paradigm of harm and help, there's a vigorous feeling to a square. We aren't getting let off the hook with this aspect. It's something we'll need to deal with. And then there's the trine. So I've got 1 or 2 examples of a trine. And remember, trines are flowing energy. They're between planets in the same element. They're easy. They offer gifts. they're definitely aspects that we can take for granted and not do much with because they're so easy. Trines are the signature aspect of Jupiter and reflect Jupiter's optimism, ease, and ability to create opportunity. Jupiter's one of the benefic planets. So the planet that trines Vesta will want to assist it or lend Vesta its talent or its, signature. If Saturn or Mars trine your Vesta, it can still be helpful. Help from Saturn will give you discipline and structure. Help from Mars will give you courage and energy. Trines from Jupiter are the most helpful as they create opportunity and expansion. Trines from Venus are not too shabby either, as they can create relationships, connection, beauty, and possible enjoyment. And the last little thing we'll mention is a sextile. Now, sextiles are still helpful. They're important. They're just not that powerful. And Vesta isn't a planet, it's an asteroid, so I don't generally look for sextiles to and from Vesta, although they still have meaning. It's just not something, it can be so minor that it can be a little insignificant or trying to read too much into something, but I thought I'd include it anyways. The sextile is still a supportive aspect, one that brings help and connection, but in a more mild way than the trines. Sextiles happen between fire and air signs or earth and water signs, and this is the mark of Venus, and therefore a sextile from Venus is the most powerful aspect that Venus can send. So a sextile between Venus and your Vesta is a good thing. It's supportive. A sextile to Vesta will be helpful but not defining. Try not to overemphasize its importance, but do consider it as something that can assist you along your journey of being able to manifest and access Vesta's significance. Okay, so those are the aspects. And if that was overwhelming and you've already lost, again, we're just going to strip it all down as I go through the examples. But right now I'm going to just talk about each planet that your Vesta might be in contact with and start to look at some examples. So I hope that this will be simple. So the sun, remember, is the self, the vitality, the soul's purpose. So Vesta in contact with the sun, depending on the contact, can create a persona that is very Vesta-like, possibly self-contained, disciplined, devoted, focused. All of that Vesta stuff is going to turn up in the personality, in the self, in the identity, in the purpose, which we've talked about before. If Vesta is next to the moon is the body, the family, the early childhood experiences or memories. The moon is also our emotional life. It's about the person who birthed us, our mother or their body, our parent or caretaker. Vesta in connection with the moon can give us a Vesta type of mother, parent, or caretaker. We might also need our lives to be very ritualized in order to feel safe. So the moon is how we feel safe. It's how we get to feel okay, we're home and everything's okay. I'm in my body. It's okay. It's how, if I'm looking at trauma, I'm going to make sure I understand the moon. Because that's the place where we need things to be consistent. We need them to be safe. So Vesta next to the moon might make one's self-care situation might need a ritual. We might need to know A is going to happen, then B is going to happen, then C. It can be a very security-driven kind of thing and need to pull in and do those regenerative internal practices in order to have one feel safe. It might also feel the moon is connected to home and our inner life. So our home and inner life might need some of those Vesta type things in them. So it might need to feel, again, like a place, a sanctuary, a place to move into one's spiritual self. If Vesta and Mercury are close to each other or in aspect, then, Mercury is the planet of communication, thinking, speaking, writing, selling. Vesta in contact with Mercury can be very beneficial for devoting ourselves to the art of communication, to writing and selling. So remember that Oscar Wilde had Mercury and Venus right next to each other. And so there was something about the life of that person that was devoted to the Mercury type of aspect of life, which is communicating. And then the style was Scorpio, which was biting and sarcastic and really could cut to the truth really well. If Vesta is next to Venus, Venus is the planet of relationship, love, what we value, what we attract, our erotic energy, and our ability to connect with others. So Venus and Vesta in aspect can create a need to ritualize our romantic interactions. It might want to channel our erotic energy into something devotional. It might be dedicated to sex as sacred worship. It might not need much or any sexual partnerships or partnering. It might go for long periods of time without romantic partners and also be devoted to beauty and or the goddess. So again, depending on if it's stressful or easy, but a Venus Vesta person will want to be more on purpose about the way they're using their creative, erotic, romantic, artistic energy, because it's Vesta. So Vesta's like, what's the purpose? How am I going to dedicate myself to this? How am I going to focus around this? How am I going to regenerate myself through this? So it's purposeful in a sense, or Venus. Mars is about courage and action and energy and drive and desire and anger and rage and violence and aggression. Mars is the warrior. So Vesta in contact with Mars can harm Vesta. Vesta's not Mars-like in nature. So these two are different. Vesta wants to pull in and, again, have that focus and dedication and steadiness. And Mars is action-orientated and disruptive and can really cause havoc. Especially if it's in conjunction, square, or opposition, Mars might disturb the peace a little bit here. And this might manifest as being too harsh or removed, right? Because Vesta's that principle of like removing, withdrawing oneself. Or one might feel attacked for their need to retreat if you've got Mars in a hard angle to Vesta. But by trine or sextile can promote a courage and an ability to really go one's own way, and maybe even by conjunction too. There might be like an incredible ability to rely on and trust one's own way of being in the world, because Mars is very independent. Mars goes one's own way, and Vesta is also quite independent. So again, we'll go over a chart that we went over last time, but talking about this, a couple of charts actually. Okay, Jupiter, the planet of plenty, the Lord of plenty, the Lordess of plenty. Faith, optimism, expansion, luck, abundance, exaggeration, inflation, indulgence, and gluttony. Jupiter is here for a really good time. So Vesta in contact with Jupiter can create a bigger type of Vesta theme in your life, but especially it can be very, very devoted to faith or religion. There's an aspect of Jupiter that's about our faith, our religious experiences, or our spiritual kind of philosophical ideas. And Vesta and Jupiter together can be very, very interested in dedicating oneself to the spiritual nature of philosophy, spiritual, religious kind of pursuit. So it can be very, very priestess-like, very monk-like, very needing to, go into the halls of spirituality and spiritual thought and religious thought and law. And again, those kind of overarching themes. Jupiter rules Sagittarius, so there's that feeling. And then there's Saturn, of course. So Saturn is the planet of constriction and form and slowing things down and aging and maturing and rules and authority and mastery. So Vesta and Saturn, which we've got two charts with this, Vesta can be harmed by Saturn for sure if it's by conjunction, square, or opposition. However, even by conjunction, as we've seen in these charts that we're looking at, the two of them can create a considerable type of concentration or considerable concentration in somebody, an ability to dedicate oneself to something no matter how difficult. Saturn is contraction, but Saturn is able to move through difficulties through sheer discipline. And so Vesta is like, I'm down. That discipline works well for me. I can focus like nobody's business. And Saturn is okay with things that are really difficult and needs that challenge in a way. So the two of them together can be pretty formidable. Saturn is contraction or exhale, and Vesta withdraws into the self for regeneration. So the combination can be very withdrawn or isolated, but also very self-sufficient. Really not needing that much from other people. Okay, so remember we have Tina Turner with Vesta and Saturn. And we talked about the fact that Tina Turner's dedication and devotion to her practice of Buddhism and chanting is, I don't know her, I don't know how much discipline it takes, but she's somebody who is incredibly disciplined in terms of her work ethic and her ability to devote herself to what is meaningful. And of course, one of her altars is music and performance. And her ability to dedicate herself to herself, Vesta in Aries, and to face really difficult, challenging things and move through them triumphantly. Again, we're dealing with fire signs here. So the fire is to be triumphant. The fire is to be courageous. The fire is to be the heroine. That's the nature of fire signs, is like, I'm special. I'm here to overcome great odds. Watch me go. And so the Vesta and Saturn here, very dedicated to, or we could say once she was dedicated to a spiritual tradition that helped to give her that discipline and form and structure. All she, when she left Ike, all she wanted to do was keep her name, her identity. And then she used that name and identity to go around the world, to touch bazillions of people, to be this big inspiration. And she's very, young at heart. That's her thing, which is very Aryan, Aries-like. Sorry, not Aryan. Aryan as in Aries. But Saturn being there is like, it can age one, or can be, again, the master. And so there's something here about, she holds this place of being the ageless master, the one who has been dedicated and devoted to something and been able to stay with it. And perhaps that's a really positive part of Vesta and Saturn, is that there's a commitment and a focus and a dedication to staying the path. And it's so easy for us, especially, maybe for us younger folks, and definitely younger than me. There's so many distractions during the day that it's hard to focus in general. But to not have immediate gratification all the time is probably going to really plague folks as they're growing up, because there's so much immediate gratification and stimulus through social media, that how does that affect our ability to have longevity? And so Saturn is that ability to see and go for the long haul and say, well, I'm in it for the whole deal. I'm not in it just to feel good for the moment. And so there's something here that we can see Tina Turner very dedicated to that longer inspiration. And then also I'm noticing that Venus, of course, is an exact trine, because they're the same element. So Sag and Venus. Vesta also, not by exact degree, but trines her ascendant, but Venus by the same degree. See, 24 degrees of Sag and 24 degrees of Aries, both fire signs. You can see 1, 2, 3 houses between them. But they're trining each other. So Venus is helping her Vesta. So Venus is saying, yes, use your charisma. I'll give you some charisma. I'll give you some of that je ne sais quoi, some of that attractiveness, and you can use it for what you're dedicated to, or use it towards what you hold to be the truth, in a sense, what you hold to be useful and meaningful, with that Vesta in the 9th house. So there's something that's very congruous there. And so maybe that's even about that when she became just Tina Turner, when she just became herself and moved away from the relationship part, that she became even more successful. But we can, okay, I'll stop there. Okay, so modern planets. So so I've just gone through traditional planets, and now I'm going to go through modern planets. So modern planets are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. They aren't part of the traditional philosophical system, so we'll look at them a little differently. Modern planets don't rule an aspect or a sign in traditional astrology, but they're very powerful and should be taken into consideration. So Uranus. Uranus can lead to a tone or create experiences that feel volatile at times, create trauma when in conjunctions with, especially with the moon, oppositions and squares. Those can be really hard from Uranus, but can also make us radical, boldly inventive, and shocking in our ability to break through old traditions and implement new visions for the future. Vesta and Uranus in aspect can speak to being devoted to breaking tradition and revolutionizing what it's dedicated to. So Angela Davis has Vesta, remember, exactly conjunct Uranus, also Mars, and also Saturn. So this is a whopping combination. So if I was talking to somebody about their work and how they made money, I'd be like, okay, well, this is the second house of income and livelihood and how they support themselves. It's got to be something that's really going to be possibly dangerous, disruptive, evocative, something that's going to smash some sort of paradigm. Now you've got the planet of tradition and the planet of breaking with tradition in the same place with Mars in the middle. And so this is a volatile combination. Of course, Angela Davis has been able to use it very well and has made her living as a revolutionary. And so the heat from Mars and the absolute just like extreme recreation and need to radicalize something is Uranus. And then the Saturn there is the discipline and the coming up against the authority. And so Vesta next to Uranus is going to be very dedicated to what is radical, what is breaking the norm and breaking tradition. And again, this is in the second house of how this person makes money. And then Vesta with Mars there can again be in Mars and Saturn. It's like, that's a gnarly combination for most people. But it also creates somebody like Angela Davis who is incredibly strong and incredibly intellectually, brilliant. This is in Gemini, so that's about the mind and how we think and communicate. Uranus is able to see things that nobody else can see. It is again brilliant. It is able to smash the paradigms that we all get stuck in. So it smashes the little boxes that we think within and says, let's turn it on its head, flip it inside out, break the whole thing, and then put it back together again and say, yes, we should abolish the prison system. We should, how are we thinking about racism? How are we thinking about feminism? How are we thinking about classism? Why are we thinking about it in these linear terms and these little confines? Let's break the whole thing and see what else is possible. That's, again, her deal. So it might be a lot to work with for a lot of people, but somebody who has that sturdy ego and sense of self is going to be able to use this energy to break things open and smash things apart. Again, there's a trine here from Neptune, exactly. And Neptune we haven't gotten to yet, but can lead great imagination and poetry and artistry and compassion. And then, of course, Angela Davis's sun is at 5. So it's a very tight, what we call grand trine. Air sign of Aquarius, air sign of Gemini, air sign of Libra, all between 4 and 5 degrees. So we know that there's this, and it's all in the houses of work. This is the house of money. This is the house of work. This is the house of career. And so these three, especially 3, 4, 5 planets and asteroid come together to form something very important in her life. And it's about her work. It's about what she's dedicated to. So she's got Vesta trine the sun. So that's somebody who is dedicated and devoted in an air type style, which is, again, about communication, the intellect, relationships, and devoted to her work. This is somebody who's got an amazing gift here in terms of what she's working on. She's also born right after an eclipse. So the sun is on the south node and the sun and moon had just come together. So Angela Davis is an eclipse person. She's born right after a solar eclipse. And so the eclipse, people that are born around eclipses, especially like within a short time after they happen or right before they happen, have a tendency to have a impact on their surroundings. So that could be in a, that could be in a small kind of ripple of a community, or that can be on the world stage. But there's something that can feel a little bit faded in terms of the quality of their life. Now, I wrote here, radical simply means grasping things at the root, which is a famous quote from Angela Davis. So dedication to being the radical, Vesta conjunct Uranus and Mars, trine the sun, trine Neptune. That is a signature of radical compassion and fighting for ideas that are humane, in a sense. We could say that. Of course, there's great difficulty here too, and we know that her life was definitely a risk, and she was on the FBI's top 10 most wanted people and all of that. So it's not been an easy road, but we can see the nature of the devotion here to breaking and shattering the existing structures and paradigms that do not work for people. Sylvia Rivera, remember we were talking about how she's got Vesta conjunct the sun, and so that makes her like a Vestal priestess, that she is that holds that energy of the priestess. And that also Uranus is also here. So we've got a Vesta Sun Uranus situation. So she is the revolutionary, right? She's got Sun Uranus exact conjunction. And this is the Vesta is dedicated to this. So there's something about her that is deeply dedicated in a Cancerian way, which is about caring for people where in the third house of community and neighborhood. So the quote I pulled was, I was a radical revolutionist. I am still a revolutionist. I am glad I was at the Stonewall riot. Now, the Stonewall was a community bar, so we're a very third house kind of place. I remember, because it was her community, I remember when someone threw a Molotov cocktail, I thought, my God, the revolution is here. The revolution is finally here, which is like Sun Uranus Vesta person. And then, Mercury is also there talking about it all. So God bless the people that are great examples of their charts. And then President Barack Obama, this is a little different. Remember, President Barack Obama has the Vesta in his fourth house of home and family, and that we talked about him, that possibly manifesting as him being devoted to home and family. Now, Uranus is in the seventh house. Uranus is a place of open enemies. The seventh house is a place of open enemies as well as committed partnerships. And of course, Obama has a tremendous amount of opponents, as any political figure would, but he has a specific type of opponent because of the fact that we live in a blatantly racist and white supremacist world, that the opposition that he receives was, unlike any other white dude president that we've had. And so that Uranus squares the Vesta. So, one interpretation we might say is that there's something about those enemies that threatens the stability of the family unit. Again, only he and his family would know how that really boils down. But I can't imagine, the type of fear that one has about their children when they're president of the gosh darn United States. And so is that something, that place of open enemies and even partnerships, is that something that threatens or gets in the way or destabilizes his relationship with family, or has for a certain amount of time, or what have you? It might also be the Uranus squaring Vesta can be about the disruption in his childhood, or the disruption with his parents, or the break that he never really, got to know his father very well. His mother moved around a lot. And so there's a destabilization in the home. There's a destabilization to Vesta. It's a square. It's a hard aspect. It's difficult. It's Uranus, which shakes things and breaks things up. So Uranus in hard aspect to the fourth house never feels that great. Because that's where we want to get settled and stable. And especially that Vesta in Taurus wants to get just hunker down and eat good food and roll around naked and enjoy life in the privacy of one's own home. But there's this this other thing. The Uranus kind of shakes that up and doesn't allow that. And also, if I was counseling someone with this and they had a big job and during their children's childhood, then I would ask them if that was disruptive in terms of them getting to spend time with their kids, and if that was difficult for them. If they felt like they'd never had enough time with them, with their home and family in some way. So just some thoughts. Okay. So modern planets also. We haven't talked about, sorry, just getting water. We haven't talked about Neptune. So aspects from Neptune can feel very confused, lost, addictive, escapist, empathetic, really creative, really artistic, without boundary, impressionistic, spiritual. Neptune in aspect to Vesta can create a very intense spiritual longing, one that leads to a devotional or spiritual path. Pluto is a planet that is really intense. Pluto aspects speak to power, intensity, transformation. Aspects to Pluto can create experiences that feel like underworld journeys, abductions, and renewal. So there's also that theme of renewal. Vesta and Pluto in aspect can create experiences that are transformational, extreme, and intense, can create an obsessive type of focus, be devoted to serving power, or dedicated to the destruction of harmful but powerful structures. So Pluto is the dude, that underworld dude energy that is like owns everything. It's all the wealth under the world and will abduct you and take you under. So it's a force that's really big to come up against, and sometimes it leads to death, because Pluto's the god of death. When gods went down into underworld, when people went down into underworld, they didn't come back. They may come back as spirits to haunt us, but they didn't come back. So Pluto can be transformation, but it can also just be the death of something. It destroys things. Pluto is a very destructive force, can be. Again, can be regenerative, can be transformative, but also can just be really hard. And definitely puts us in touch with our power. So Dr. Martin Luther King had Vesta in a very tight square. So Vesta's here and Pluto is here, and Vesta's 18 and Pluto's 17. So you'll notice that I've used aspects that are very close to each other. I think that's best for things like Vesta. You can absolutely widen it, but it gets much more, then we start kind of in the beginning of our learning, pulling at straws a little bit. So I was trying to use things with a very close orb within a couple of degrees just to get the most pronounced examples that we can. So I would look for the things that are the closest to a conjunction, an opposition, a square, trine for you. Okay, so Vesta in Aries in the 12th house, we talked about that for Martin Luther King. It's square Pluto. So, would you say that he was somebody who came up against great Plutonian forces, the great forces of power, and that had to deal with a tremendous amount of intense opposition and intense friction? He is, of course, somebody who was the conduit for the movement of a lot of people, but also the lightning rod for the opposition. So took a lot, got credit for a lot, but also took a lot of opposition. Not that a lot of people didn't, but he rises in a way to be seen and have probably a lot of personal clashes. And so he's got Pluto in the 3rd house of communication. And so if we're looking at this in a modern kind of way, we might say, well, Pluto in the 3rd house can really speak truth to power and be very vocal and very, very convincing in their speeches or in their way of expressing themselves. It might also, with Vesta in the 12th house, again, of experiences of being incarcerated, or experiences of being not having our full rights, experiences of being treated unjustly, and having to survive the consequences of that, or deal with the consequences of that. Again, losing our freedoms in some way. That if Vesta is there, there's something of a dedication to that, to alleviating suffering for others that have to endure that. So we talked about the connection between the Birmingham jail letter and also, slavery, Jim Crow, all of Martin Luther King's what he was dedicated to during his lifetime, and what his legacy does. And that square from Pluto definitely comes up against the conflict that he faced. And that his words still face, right? There's something of them, something about his dedication to that freedom, to truth, that still conjures up that fear and that opposition that can feel very powerful. So let's move on to points. Points are the ascendant. So let's look at, this is the ascendant. And directly across from the ascendant is the descendant. And then this is the midheaven, the MC. Remember, that's the noon. So this is sunrise. This is the high noon. This is sunset. And then across from the MC is the IC. It's right here. And that's midnight. So those are all really important points in the chart. And the ascendant is a place of self, place of life, place of body, place of motivation for living out the soul's purpose. Vesta in contact with the ascendant can create a situation much like Sun Vesta, where the person has a Vesta-like identity. The midheaven is a place of career, reputation, public life. It's high noon. Vesta in connection with the midheaven can create a career that honors Vesta types of things. So remember, Richard Branson has Vesta conjunct the midheaven and names everything Virgin something. Also, I realized that Richard Branson has the moon in Virgo, and Virgo is the Virgin, and his moon is in the second house of how he makes money. So it's like, it's everywhere in his chart. So just as an example, Muhammad Ali, so if Vesta is dedication and focus to something spiritual in nature, possibly, then Muhammad Ali had Vesta exactly trine his ascendant. So if the ascendant is my motivation for living and my way of moving out into the world, in a sense, is related to my sense of self and my life force, then Vesta trining it would say something to the power of this person. And again, his Vesta was in Sagittarius, so it's about, relaying the truth, the one and only truth. Vesta in a trine to his ascendant is something about integrating in a very easy and useful and helpful way that dedication and focus in a Sagittarian style to the truth into one's own motivation for living. And Muhammad Ali had ascendant or Leo rising, so the ascendant was in Leo. And so that motivation for living is to be the best, is to be the king, is to be the center of the solar system, is to be the performer, is to be the one who cracks the jokes and is the one who is at the center of everything. And he was very good at doing that. But that Vesta trining the ascendant is also talking about his spiritual devotion, I think. And that he was also, he was somebody who had many children and wives, relationships, a great career, but, struck the world with his ability to be dedicated to his own spiritual principles of equality, and then, of course, his own spiritual principles of being a Muslim. So that piece of his beliefs and his dedication to what he held to be the most important thing, that Vesta type thing, really assisted him in some ways in terms of his way of expressing himself. Okay. And then His Holiness the Dalai Lama, of course, has Vesta right next to the midheaven within 3 degrees. So the midheaven is the career point. The midheaven is how we kind of intersect with the world in a big way. So it has something to do with our job. So when I said like Richard Branson had Vesta conjunct the midheaven, well, so does the Dalai Lama. So they do that in very different ways. But the Dalai Lama is a monk, so that is Vesta, right? That is just another incarnation of being Vesta, and that's what he does, and that's who he is. Also conjunct Saturn. So there's again that discipline, that order, that structure. The Saturn is 10 degrees away. It's not as close as Tina Turner's, but still very much worth noting. They hug the midheaven. He's also the elder, the wise one, okay. And so the other points are the descendant, the place right across from the ascendant, and the IC, the place right across from the MC. The descendant is the place of the other, the relationship. It's the place of sundown. Vesta in connection with the descendant can create relationships with Vesta type people. The IC is a place of familial connections, roots, home, family, midnight. Vesta's connection here can create a family environment that's isolating or isolated, religious, or maybe even spiritual in nature, or needing that in one's home. Of course, we talked about this. Bill Clinton has Vesta right on the descendant. And I know that because this is 6 degrees and there's a bunch of blue lines here, and the ascendant is 5 degrees. And so this is the exact opposite point of his ascendant, and Vesta's right there. And we also talked about the fact that Mars and Neptune are in direct opposition to it. And because Mars can feel like a bit of an attack, then, I would always be like wondering about, how does this person's partner experience them? Are there things that this person does inadvertently or directly that hurt this person or sabotage this person? Again, I went through all this stuff. And with the Neptune, do they go unconscious about it, or do they pretend it's not happening? Or is there some deep spiritual connection? I don't know. And again, if this wasn't Bill Clinton's chart, we didn't know anything about this person, then I would say that there's like it's important to work out the painful aspects of relationship with a Mars in opposition to the descendant with Vesta right there. But it's also with Neptune there can be a lot of delusion and betrayal and fantasy to move through. But once you do, maybe there's also a tremendous amount of spiritual connection and union. Okay. And then there's the nodes. So this, if you're burnt out at this point, then just turn this off and listen to it at another point. But the nodes are, so this is the north node, and directly opposing it is the south node. Again, I told you to put the south node in your charts, and then I didn't do it, so I'm really sorry about that. But let's look at a couple of them. So this is the north node, and the south node would be directly opposing it. Again, this is the north node. The south node would be 14 degrees of Pisces. Martin Luther King's, here I put them in. So Martin Luther King's north node is at 28 degrees of Taurus, and south node is at 28 degrees of Scorpio. And so, yeah, there was something else I wanted to say about this chart. I didn't feel like I really got to the heart of it. With Vesta in the 12th house of needing to, there's a focus and a dedication to, yes, the suffering that other people have to endure and that one has to endure through the systems and the institutions that people get trapped within. So I see a lot of people who work in institutions with stuff in the 12th house. But with the square to Pluto, it's gnarlier. Like it's edgier, and it's much more about really uprooting the evil, because Pluto is an underground energy. And so there is a need to come up against what is at the base of that stuff, what is underneath everything. And when we uproot that, what happens to us? What is the risk to our own life, to our own self? And of course, Martin Luther King also has Pluto opposing his sun and his midheaven. So there's, this isn't the only thing, right? Vesta's squaring his sun and squaring his Pluto, and he had Pluto opposing his sun. So all of that big power stuff was right in front of him in terms of his life force. And so that opposition is major. It's coming up against those systems of power quite often, or people that feel really powerful, and holding ourselves steady in the face of it. So we've seen what the nodes look like. The North Node is an upward movement. It's an upward energy. It's an ascending or increasing point. The nodes are, of course, just where eclipses happen. But a lot of people in modern astrology say the North Node is your life purpose and you should go there, and the South Node is what you've overdone in past lives and you should stay away from there. Okay, and I think it's a little simplistic sometimes, so I like to think of it astronomically, where nodes are points where eclipses happen. When eclipses happen, light goes out. Light is equated to life in astrology, and so they're kind of gnarly points in our chart. Eclipses are like, we're not just quite sure what's going to happen. So the North Node is said to increase our hunger and our appetite for achievement and success. Some relate the North Node to the work we need to tackle this lifetime, the place we need to grow ourselves into. The North Node in your natal chart points to a place where you might have a hunger, a desire, or a need to develop and experience a certain part of life. If the North Node is sitting next to Vesta, not Vests, that's autocorrect, Vesta, it will increase Vesta's signification. So Vesta will become bigger in a way. The South Node is a place of descending energy. It's a place where we kind of let go of things. It's a downward pull. Some relate this to loss or former incarnations or what we have done in the past and no longer need to focus on. Some astrologies consider the South Node a point that connects us to the powerful energies of the unconscious that can, when dealt with, lead us to experience our spiritual nature. Vesta by the South Node might need to learn or know inherently how to work with loss or suffering, may be dedicated to spiritual pursuits that focus on letting go. Wherever the South Node is in your chart will tell you something about the nature of loss or possible difficulty or where you grapple with it, but it may also function as a place of great understanding and knowing that you come into life with, or a place that leads you towards a spiritual path, or a place that teaches you about the nature of letting go, transitions, and acceptance. So again, Vesta there might be focused on that or help you to understand it in a way, or there might be something that in your life that you have had to devote yourself to understanding this, or you might hold that place, that fire, that altar for other people. Again, depending on the sign and the place where it is. So I know that that's a lot of information, and for some of you, you're going to be like, that's too much. I don't like it, and it's too confusing. And for others, you might even want a lot more than that. We'll do this again with Juno in the later part, and so we'll talk about this all over again. And again, this is an ongoing conversation, so let me know how this felt for you, and if there's a lot of questions about the same thing, then I'll respond with a video to it. Otherwise, I hope that was somewhat useful and helpful, and sending you lots of love. I'm recording this right before the Leo eclipse. So eclipse blessings, lots of love for you, and take good care of yourselves. Bye for now.